Former federal prosecutor Shan Wu is joining us now. Shan, one of the reasons we may not get to see everything, that there may be redactions, is because of grand jury secrecy. Why is that information typically kept secret, and what could it include?
It's kept secret because there's a federal rule, 6E, that requires that it be kept secret. The witnesses themselves are free to talk about it, but the prosecutors, anyone in the government, has to keep it secret. They can apply to the court to ask the court to lift that, and that's something that members of Congress have been asking for. And it's typically really integral to an investigative decision. When I was a prosecutor, I wrote many what they call pros memos, prosecution memos. Kind of sounds like a version of what Mueller is doing. When you write those, the grand jury information, witness testimony, their transcripts, the documents subpoenaed, it's extremely interwoven into the narrative and your recommendations and analysis. So if you scrub all of that out, then all by itself, that one category is going to leave him with relatively little, I think, for us to read.
You mentioned Congress now applying or asking for the Attorney General to go to the courts in order to be allowed to release some of the grand jury's secret information. Is there any precedent for that to happen?
Well, there's lots of precedent for that to happen in terms of asking a court to release it. Obviously, there's the Watergate scenario. They're looking at that. And in previous independent counsel investigations, which are different, there was a requirement of a public report, so there's a little bit more leverage there. But it's fairly commonplace to ask a judge to release something, and the judge will take that into consideration. I think the other thing to consider here is we're not just looking at grand jury information anymore. With this sort of moving bar, no pun intended, the Attorney General has also now come up with an additional bunch of categories, and in particular his last category, which he says would involve any embarrassing information to third parties who are peripheral to the investigation. That's completely in his discretion, so it gives him a gigantic kind of a safety net to basically put into that category anything he wants to keep out.
But when you talk about embarrassing information, isn't that along the same lines of what we've heard, which is you don't tarnish the reputation of people or damage somebody who isn't actually indicted or charged with a crime?
That's exactly right, and that's the notion of not pulling a James Comey by putting out a lot of derogatory information. But this is an unusual situation because the report is not just a charge or don't charge, and we have a strong hint of that because in that tiny little quote that we got, Mueller did write that the president is not exonerated. And coming from someone like him, that is an enormously big statement to make in the land of James Comey's statements about Hillary Clinton. And it implies that there is going to be a lot of information on both sides that was favorable and unfavorable. And that is precisely why the public and certainly Congress wants to see that, because in some ways, the next step is really a pass-off to the next prosecutor or next investigator, and that's going to be Congress. So they need to see the fruits of what was gathered in order to be able to do their job.
All right, Shan Wu, as always, good to have you with us. Thanks.
Good to see you.